Oscar and his wife, Melanie, seemed to have a life that many people would envy. Oscar had carved out a successful career as a senior engineer at a well-known tech company, making enough money to offer them both a life of comfort. His skill and experience earned him a solid reputation in the industry, and his paycheck ensured they were always able to enjoy the finer things in life without a second thought. Meanwhile, Melanie worked as a marketing manager downtown, overseeing major clients and steadily climbing the corporate ladder. Her natural charm made her a hit with clients, perhaps a little too much of a hit at times. From the outside, their marriage seemed like a fairy tale. They had spent years building their life together, anchored in what Oscar believed was a strong foundation of mutual respect and understanding. Their home, recently revamped with Oscar's sensible ideas and Melanie's eye for design, was a place they both took pride in. It was a cozy suburban retreat, with an open kitchen perfect for family meals. Every detail had been thoughtfully designed to create a space where they could grow old together, or so Oscar thought. Their children, Ella and Austin, were the heart of their family. Ella, 12 years old, was sharp, quick-witted, and had a mischievous sense of humor, traits she'd clearly inherited from her mother. Austin, 7, was sweet and eager to please, always looking up to his big sister and happily following Oscar around during his weekend DIY projects. Their weekends were filled with joy, laughter, board games, and homemade meals. Friday nights were reserved for family movie marathons on the couch, complete with Melanie's signature popcorn, seasoned to perfection. To anyone looking in, it was a picture-perfect life. Oscar and Melanie often talked about their future, imagining the adventures they'd take once the kids were older. They had even entertained the idea of starting a small business together, dreaming of a life full of travel and, eventually, grandchildren filling their home. It felt as if they had everything they could ever want. But recently, Oscar had begun to sense that something was off. At first, it was subtle. A mention here and there of a client named Brad, who seemed to be popping up more and more in Melanie's conversations. She spoke often about working late on ambitious projects that required her full focus and how important Brad was to her career. But there was something in the way she talked about him that didn't sit right with Oscar. And when he started noticing Brad's name lighting up on her phone late at night, that unease began to grow into something much harder to ignore. Then, one evening, Melanie said something that made Oscar's concern grow even deeper. "Brad invited us to a weekend retreat at this incredible coastal resort," she said, her eyes practically sparkling with excitement. "He's booked the whole place for his team, and their partners, too." Oscar raised an eyebrow, trying to gauge her reaction. "That sounds pretty extravagant," he commented. "It is," Melanie replied, grinning. "He's really big on team bonding. This is a huge opportunity for me, and he made a point of including you. You'll finally get to meet him and the team," Melanie said, her enthusiasm contagious. But despite her excitement, Oscar couldn't shake the feeling that something about this whole situation didn't sit right. A man he'd never met, who could afford to rent out an entire resort. And the way Melanie spoke about Brad. There was a tone of admiration in her voice that Oscar couldn't ignore. "That does sound generous," he replied cautiously, trying to mask the unease gnawing at him. Melanie's face lit up even more. "You'll love it. The resort is absolutely gorgeous, right by the ocean. If this works out, it could be a huge turning point for me at work. Brad's got this magnetic energy. He's so inspiring." Oscar nodded, though his discomfort lingered. Admiration for a boss was one thing, but this felt like something more. Still, he didn't want to seem overly suspicious. "It sounds like a great opportunity. Definitely a good chance to make some important connections." When they arrived at the resort, it was far more lavish than Oscar had imagined. Perched high on a cliff with a panoramic view of the crashing waves below, the place looked straight out of a luxury travel brochure. Tall, swaying palm trees lined the entrance, and the soothing sound of a waterfall blended with the fresh, salty scent of the sea air. Inside, the lobby was a testament to excess. Gleaming marble floors stretched beneath grand chandeliers, golden light bathed every corner, and exquisite sculptures filled the space. Oscar had stayed at upscale hotels before, but nothing like this. This was on an entirely different level. And there, in the middle of it all, was Brad, effortlessly mingling with the guests as if he owned the place. Which, as Oscar would soon find out, he did. Tall, impeccably dressed, and radiating self-assurance, Brad seemed the type of man who always got exactly what he wanted. Oscar, Melanie, so happy you could make it. Brad's voice boomed across the room as he waved them over, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. Brad extended a firm handshake to Oscar, offering him a practiced smile. "Welcome to my little retreat," he said with a casual chuckle. "I bought the place a few months ago. Thought it'd be perfect for hosting events like this." Oscar shook his hand, forcing a polite smile despite the discomfort building in his chest. Brad didn't just rent this resort, he owned it. And as Melanie laughed along with Brad's effortless charisma, Oscar felt an increasing sense of alienation, like he didn't quite belong. "This place is absolutely stunning," Melanie said, her voice filled with awe as her eyes darted over the opulent space. She took in the ornate sculptures, the soaring ceilings, and the sleek grand piano tucked in a corner. "I've never seen anything like this." Brad's smile widened at her reaction, his gaze lingering on Melanie just a little too long for Oscar's comfort. "I'm glad you like it," Brad said smoothly. "I wanted to create a place where everyone could really unwind and connect. Feel free to make yourselves at home." The evening quickly turned into a whirlwind of introductions and small talk. Brad's presence seemed to fill the room, his magnetic energy impossible to ignore. He moved effortlessly from one group to the next, drawing laughter and admiration from everyone he encountered. There was something almost methodical in the way he leaned in, close enough to show interest, but never so close it felt too intimate. Melanie, for her part, seemed captivated by him. Oscar noticed more than once that her eyes followed Brad as he moved through the crowd. And when Brad finally joined their group, Melanie leaned in a little too eagerly, hanging on his every word as if drawn to him like a moth to a flame. Oscar tried to tell himself it was all harmless. She was just networking, after all. But each shared laugh and glance between Melanie and Brad left a cold knot in his stomach. Slowly, he felt like an outsider in his own marriage. Later that night, back in their lavish suite, Oscar was met with yet another surprise. The room was more lavish than Oscar could have ever imagined. Larger than many apartments, with a private balcony that offered an endless view of the ocean. Melanie seemed to be in unusually high spirits, her mood light and carefree, as she poured champagne from a complimentary bottle that had been left waiting for them. She handed him a glass, offering him a soft smile as she raised hers. "To us," she said, her voice almost tender as her eyes met his. "Thank you for coming with me, Oscar. I know this isn't exactly your kind of getaway." Oscar clinked his glass against hers, forcing a smile to mask the unease that had been gnawing at him all evening. Melanie was unusually affectionate, her touch lingering on his shoulder and her laughter carefree. She kissed him with a sweetness he hadn't felt in what seemed like forever, and for a moment, Oscar wondered if she was trying to reassure him, or perhaps herself. But despite her warmth, the discomfort only deepened. There was something unsettling about her sudden affection, like it was a mask hiding something else. He tried to push the thought away, focusing on the moment instead. She looked radiant, genuinely happy even, and he didn't want to spoil the night with his growing doubts. Wrapping his arms around her, he held her close and silently promised himself that, at least until morning, he would push aside his worries. The next day started with a fragile sense of calm. Over breakfast on the resort's sunny patio, the ocean stretched out before them, sparkling beneath a cloudless sky. The sight was almost enough to chase away Oscar's lingering anxieties. They laughed over coffee and a spread of fresh pastries, enjoying the kind of easy, carefree morning that made everything feel normal. Or at least it did for a little while. Then Brad appeared. He sauntered up to their table, his ever-present smile as smooth and unreadable as it had been the night before. "Good morning," he greeted them warmly, before his tone shifted to something more serious. "I'd like to have a quick chat with both of you in my office. There's an opportunity one think is worth discussing." Oscar's curiosity mixed with caution as they followed Brad through the elegant halls, eventually arriving at a secluded office tucked away from the resort's busy areas. Inside, the room was all about power. An imposing mahogany desk sat in the center, and the floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the ocean beyond. Brad motioned for them to sit across from him before sinking into his leather chair, his expression thoughtful and calculating. "There's something I've been mulling over," Brad began, his voice slow and deliberate as he leaned back, his sharp eyes flicking between Oscar and Melanie as if he were carefully measuring their reactions. "It's a bit unconventional, but with the right mindset, I think it could benefit all of us." He let the words hang in the air, creating a moment of tense silence. Brad's gaze shifted to Melanie, lingering just a second too long, and Oscar felt a discomfort stir in his stomach. Leaning forward, Brad steepled his fingers with a focused intensity. "Let me be blunt," he said. "I'd like to spend the evening with Melanie alone." The room seemed to freeze. Before Oscar could fully register what had just been said, Brad went on. "And, of course, I'll compensate you both generously for your understanding." For a split second, Oscar thought he must have misunderstood. "Excuse me?" he managed to croak, his voice shaky and hoarse. "What did you just say?" Brad's face remained impassive. "Exactly what I said. A financial offer, if you will. Consider it a mutual investment," Brad continued, his voice smooth and calculating. "Melanie stands to gain from this, and so do you. It's an opportunity, an investment in your family's future." Each word landed like a punch to Oscar's gut. But just as his anger surged, he noticed the large man standing silently by the door, a security guard. The man didn't move, but his presence was a clear, unspoken threat. Oscar swallowed hard, struggling to keep his fury in check. "Are you out of your goddamn mind?" he spat, his voice shaking with indignation. "You honestly think I'd even entertain something so sickening?" Brad raised a hand. "Oscar, let's not be hasty. I know it sounds extreme, but this is just business. Most people, when they really think it through, see how mutually beneficial it can be." A cold shiver crawled up Oscar's spine as he turned to Melanie, desperately hoping she would put a stop to this madness. But she wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on Brad, her expression thoughtful, as if she was actually considering it. "Melanie," Oscar said, his voice trembling as he whispered her name. "You're not seriously thinking about this." Her face softened, but only for an instant. She placed a hand on his arm, offering him a smile that seemed almost apologetic. "Oscar, just hear him out," she murmured. "Think about what it means for our future. Brad has real influence, real power. This could open so many doors for me, for both of us." The betrayal Oscar felt was like a dagger being twisted deeper with every passing moment. "You're actually considering this?" he asked. "After everything we've been through? For money?" Melanie's expression tightened. She looked away, avoiding his gaze, but she didn't say no. That silence, her silence, spoke volumes, and it was louder than anything she could have said. Brad, ever the opportunist, pounced on the moment. His voice was calm, almost soothing, as if he were explaining a business proposition to a reluctant client. "This is about progress, Oscar," he said, leaning back in his chair with practiced ease. "There's nothing about this that can't be managed. For Melanie, this is just another step in securing her future. All of our futures, really." The rational tone in Brad's voice made Oscar's skin crawl. Felt grotesque, surreal. It was like he was selling him a slick marketing pitch for something vile, something unfathomable. Oscar's anger surged again, his fists clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to lash out. But his eyes flicked to the guard by the door, whose watchful gaze was a clear warning. This wasn't a battle he could win, not here. Brad pressed on, undeterred by Oscar's silence. "I understand your reaction," he continued smoothly. "It's natural. But this isn't the scandal you're imagining. It's just one night, Oscar. One night, and no one needs to know." Oscar couldn't take it any longer. He shoved his chair back, the legs screeching across the floor as he planted his hands on the desk, leaning in with a fury that shook his voice. "You're sick," he hissed, barely keeping his anger in check. I don't care what you're offering. The answer is no. For the first time, Melanie's composure cracked. Her face fell, her cheeks flushing with an emotion Oscar couldn't quite place. Disappointment? Shame? Maybe both. But still, she didn't speak. Brad, however, remained perfectly composed. His confidence unwavering. His shrug casual, as if they were haggling over a business deal. Take some time to think it over, he said, as nonchalantly as if they were negotiating terms of a contract. I'll give you both until tonight. Oscar didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the office. The sheer audacity of Brad's offer, and Melanie's hesitation, left him feeling sick. She hadn't said no. How could she? How had they gotten to this point? I reached the terrace that overlooked the ocean, the sound of waves crashing violently against the rocks below, as I gripped the railing with white-knuckled fists. My jaw was tight. I tried to steady myself, to make sense of the chaos swirling in my mind, but the world felt completely upside down. Oscar, came Melanie's voice from behind me, soft and hesitant. Can we talk? I turned to face her, and the second she saw the look in my eyes, she stopped in her tracks. Her smile faltered. Good, I thought bitterly. This is insane, Melanie, I said. Why would you even think about something so sick? We have everything. We've built a good life. 2 beautiful kids. A nice home, stability. What could possibly make you want to throw it all away? Melanie let out a long, quiet sigh, her eyes drifting toward the ocean as she wrung. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then, with a shaky breath, she looked back at me, her eyes pleading. It's not like that, Oscar, she said softly. This won't change anything between us. It's just one night. And think about what we could do with the money. We could pay off the mortgage, set up the kids for the future. Hell, we could even buy that vacation home we've always dreamed of. As she spoke, her voice gained momentum, her words echoing Brad's promises like she'd memorized them. Brad's offering us a chance, Oscar. A chance to have a life we never even thought was possible. I stood there, frozen, staring at her as if she were a stranger. Not anymore. Her voice was almost hypnotic, as if Brad had cast some kind of spell on her. Melanie, you're talking about selling yourself, I said. You're actually considering betraying our family for money? I can't believe this. She shook her head, stepping closer. It's not betrayal, she insisted, her voice soft but firm. We're strong enough to handle this. I love you, Oscar. Can't you see? It's just one night and then it's over. No one else has to know. It'll be like it never happened. Her words cut through me like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I wanted to shake her, to snap her out of whatever delusion had taken over her. But the way she looked at me, with pity, maybe even a touch of frustration, made it clear that she saw me as the one who didn't understand. No, I whispered, my voice trembling with disbelief. Melanie, don't you get it? This does change everything. Don't be so rigid, Oscar, she snapped. People make sacrifices for the ones they love all the time. I'm thinking about our future, about the kids' future. I could barely process what I was hearing. Sacrifice, I choked out. You're willing to sacrifice us for one night with him? You'd choose his money over keeping our family whole? How could you, Melanie? For just a moment, I saw her expression falter. A hint of doubt, maybe even regret. But it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by something harder, more resolute. This is an opportunity, Oscar. You don't understand how rare this is. The doors it could open. I can't, I said, my voice breaking as the words slipped out. I won't be a part of this, Melanie. This is unbearable. Her face shifted then, her expression cold and defensive. The warmth was gone, replaced by irritation. You're being selfish, she said sharply. You're not seeing the bigger picture. You're letting your pride ruin our future. Why can't you just see this as a means to an end? Because, I said, once you make a choice like this, there's no going back. And maybe, I hesitated. Maybe you've already made that choice. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there. The rest of the day passed in a tense silence, each of us trapped in our own thoughts. Every glance I shot her way carried a silent message. If she went to Brad, there would be consequences. I didn't know exactly what those consequences would be yet, but one thing was certain. I couldn't just stand by while she tore apart everything we'd built. Melanie, though, met my intensity with an unsettling calm. She nodded along as if she understood, but her words felt empty, hollow, like she was saying whatever it took to get me to back off. All day long, my unease grew, a gnawing feeling that she was just humoring me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the hotel came alive with noise. Laughter, music, and chatter filled the air, guests mingling in the warm evening glow. But no matter how vibrant the surroundings, my unease only deepened. Melanie was standing beside me, making small talk with the other guests, but her mind was elsewhere. I could see it in the way her eyes kept scanning the room, darting around, searching. And then, in the middle of the bustling crowd, I saw her slip away. Melanie's movements were so smooth, so deliberate. It was clear she had planned this. A chill ran down Oscar's spine as the realization hit. She wasn't coming back tonight. She'd made her choice. Anger surged through him. He could already picture her walking toward Brad's suite, her mind made up. The thought of her there, of him letting it happen, left him spiraling, trapped by the weight of what he couldn't control. With the hotel's security and Brad's influence, he was powerless to act, unable to storm the suite and drag her out. But the image of Brad's smug face haunted him. Pacing the empty hallway near their room, Oscar's mind raced, his emotions churning until a reckless idea took root. He couldn't stop Melanie directly, but maybe he could make a statement. Something bold, unignorable, that would tear apart Brad's carefully crafted plans. That's how he found himself in the hallway, matches in hand, staring at the thick hotel curtains. It started small, just a single flame licking the fabric, but within moments, the fire surged, devouring the drapes with alarming speed. Smoke curled upward, thick and dark as the flames climbed higher. Oscar took a step back, watching with a mix of satisfaction and horror as the fire spread faster than he'd anticipated. The heat burned against his skin, the roar of flames rising as the alarms began blaring, shrill and jarring. Panic gripped him, the acrid smoke filling his lungs, and he stumbled backward, coughing. Chaos unfolded before him. Guests flooded the hall, voices frantic as they scrambled to escape. Security and staff raced to contain the situation, and within moments, firefighters arrived, barking orders as they worked to extinguish the blaze. Oscar melted into the crowd, his heart pounding. He'd disrupted everything. There was a grim satisfaction in that, but the reality of the danger he'd caused weighed heavily on him. This was far beyond what he'd intended. Meanwhile, in Brad's suite, things were just starting to heat up. Melanie, her shirt half unbuttoned, paused as the piercing wail of the fire alarm shattered the air. Her heart leapt in her throat, her hands frozen mid-motion. "What the hell is that?" Brad muttered, irritation flashing across his face. Is that the fire alarm?" Melanie asked, her voice unsteady. Before Brad could answer, the intercom crackled to life. "Attention! All guests must evacuate immediately. Please proceed to the nearest exit." Brad cursed under his breath, quickly adjusting his shirt. "Let's go," he said, annoyance seeping into his tone. Probably a false alarm, but we'll see. They moved toward the door, but before they could leave, thick black smoke began seeping in from the hallway. Melanie's stomach sank as she quickly buttoned her shirt and backed away from Brad. Dread coursed through her. This wasn't a drill. They joined the frantic flow of guests spilling into the hall. Melanie's mind raced as she hurried down the stairs, guilt gnawing at her. Could Oscar have done this? The thought twisted her insides, and she felt a pang of regret, her earlier certainty now replaced by doubt. She had pushed him too far. She had seen the strain in his eyes, the pain, and now it hit her. He might have done this, a desperate act of retaliation. As they reached the ground floor, the acrid smoke filled the lobby, swirling around panicked guests. Melanie and Brad quickened their pace, pressing toward the exit. But just as they neared the wide glass doors, Melanie froze. Through the chaos, she saw him. Oscar's face was hard, unreadable, as he moved through the crowd. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Melanie felt the weight of her choices crush down on her. Guilt sliced through her like a blade. For the first time, she truly understood the pain she had caused. She opened her mouth, unsure of what to say, but before she could speak, Oscar moved swiftly toward Brad. With a sudden, fluid motion, he swung his elbow up in a sharp arc, landing squarely on Brad's nose. The impact was solid, and Brad staggered backward, his arrogance shifting to stunned disbelief. Then he crumpled to the floor, unconscious, in the midst of the chaos. In the thick smoke and confusion, no one seemed to notice what had happened. Not even Brad before he passed out. Oscar's chest tightened, his breath shallow as her words sank in. Options. She hadn't just wanted a better life. She wanted a way out, a way to escape the life they had built together. The life that was, until tonight, everything he thought they both valued. Is that what you think this is? Oscar's voice was barely above a whisper, the pain raw and cutting through him like a jagged blade. You think we were trapped? That I was holding you back? He couldn't believe what he was hearing. You wanted options? He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him, the sound hollow. You're talking about selling yourself for a few extra choices? Melanie flinched. Oscar, I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could fix everything, make it all better. I just didn't want to feel like we were stuck anymore. You are stuck, Melanie? Oscar snapped, his voice rising in anger, desperation. We're all stuck. You don't get to just escape when it gets hard. You don't get to throw us all away for the illusion of a better life. And that's what this was. An illusion. Her eyes welled with tears as she took a shaky step toward him, her voice softening. I never wanted to hurt you, Oscar. But you don't understand. You don't see how hard it's been. How small I feel sometimes. This was the first time someone offered me something more. I wanted to grab it before it slipped away. I thought it would solve everything. Oscar stood frozen, his fists clenched, his breath ragged as he fought to control the fury and heartbreak clawing at him. He didn't know what hurt more, the fact that she had even considered it or that in her eyes, this was her solution. He had always seen their life together as a partnership, as something that couldn't be broken. But tonight, she had shattered that illusion, and he wasn't sure if it could ever be put back together. You think Brad's offer was going to fix things? Oscar's voice was a whisper now, hoarse with disbelief. You think one night with him, one sacrifice, was going to make our lives better? His gaze darkened. Melanie, he doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about us. He only cares about getting what he wants, and you let him think he could have it. Melanie looked away, her tears falling freely now. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't think it would go this far. I just wanted to change things, to feel like I had a choice. Oscar stepped back, a sudden wave of anger and sorrow flooding through him. You want to feel like you have a choice? Then choose this, choose us. Choose your family. But don't you dare act like you didn't just make the worst decision of your life, Melanie. Because that's what you did. You chose him over us. You chose money over everything we've worked for. Melanie's eyes searched his face, her own expression pleading, torn between regret and defensiveness. I didn't think it would destroy what we have. Her voice faltered. I thought you would want better too. Oscar's laugh was bitter and sharp. Better? He echoed, shaking his head. Better is us. Better is what we've already built. I didn't need money or someone else's influence to make this work. And neither did you. You just didn't trust that we could make it work together. His eyes never left hers, but he could feel the gulf widening between them, an abyss neither of them knew how to bridge. Melanie's breath caught as she wiped her tears, still trying to steady herself. Oscar, I don't know how to fix this. She sounded broken, lost. I never wanted to lose you. The weight of everything. The fire, the betrayal, her uncertainty. pressed down on him, suffocating him in a way that left him hollow. He wanted to say something, anything, to fix it, but there were no words. Instead, he spoke with the quiet finality of someone who had been broken and was done pretending. "I need time to think. I can't." He stopped himself, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I can't look at you right now and pretend everything is okay." Her face crumpled as she took a step forward, but Oscar held up a hand, his palm outstretched in a wordless plea for distance. "I need time," he repeated softly, his voice breaking. "I need to figure out what's left after all of this." Melanie nodded, her tears falling freely now. Oscar turned and walked toward the stairs. Melanie stood frozen, staring at his back as the door to their future slammed shut. For the first time in years, she felt like a stranger in her own life. She wanted to move, to do something, but she was paralyzed, consumed by the quiet devastation of what had just transpired. It wasn't just one night. It wasn't just a mistake. It was the culmination of 1,000 small cracks in their foundation. A slow, creeping erosion she'd been too blind to notice until it was too late. And in trying to escape, she had ended up destroying everything that mattered. But she had hoped, that there was still a chance to fix it. But that hope was now gone, evaporating like smoke in the chaos of the fire. Melanie wiped her eyes. She wanted to scream, to shout at him, to make him understand that she never meant for any of this to happen. She had never felt so small, so utterly alone. For a long moment, she simply stood there, staring down the dark hallway. She had made her choices, and now the consequences were bearing down on her, suffocating every part of her that had once been sure of their love. "You made your choice. Now I have to make mine." Oscar's words lingered in her mind, like an insurmountable wall between them. She had chosen Brad's offer, and now she was left standing in the wreckage of a marriage she had once believed to be unbreakable. She stumbled back toward the living room. She collapsed onto the couch. She had betrayed him. She had betrayed them. The minutes stretched into hours as Melanie sat in the quiet, the weight of her guilt a constant companion. Even if she begged him to come back, could things ever be the same? A cold shiver ran through her as she reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she unlocked it. The screen lit up with a message, Brad's name blinking in her notifications. She stared at it for a long, torturous moment before finally swiping the message open. It was short, matter-of-fact. "The offer still stands." For a brief moment, she felt something akin to revulsion. The coldness of Brad's words, the way he seemed unaffected by everything that had happened, made her skin crawl. But even in that moment of clarity, she couldn't shake the doubt. The belief that perhaps this was the only way to secure a future she had never felt in control of before. But then she remembered Oscar's face, his words, his pain. It was no longer about money or a life that could have been. It was about everything they had already shared, everything she had almost lost in one reckless decision. And in that moment, as the tears continued to fall, Melanie knew something had irrevocably shifted within her. She didn't want to run anymore. She didn't want options that only promised the illusion of freedom. She wanted the man who had always been there, who had stood beside her through the worst of times. But was it too late? Her phone slipped from her grasp as she leaned back against the couch. She had no idea what came next, only that this was the beginning of a new kind of reckoning. Oscar had made his choice, and now Melanie had to figure out if she had a place in the life they had built, or if she had already destroyed it beyond repair. The years that followed felt like a blur of small, steady movements, a slow, painful trudging forward, as if time itself were trying to distance both of them from the past. But no matter how far Oscar and Melanie moved, the shadow of what had happened loomed over them. The life they had shared, the connection they had once had, was gone. For Oscar, there were moments when the weight of what he had lost would hit him all over again, like a punch to the gut. On some evenings, after he tucked Ella and Austin into bed, he would sit in the quiet of the living room, staring at the empty space where Melanie used to sit. The silence stretched long and deep in the house, and for a brief, fleeting second, he would think he could still hear her voice. But it was always gone before he could hold on to it. And yet, despite the emptiness, Oscar had rebuilt himself in ways he hadn't thought possible. His life was simpler now, quieter, but there was a kind of peace in that simplicity. The fire, both literal and metaphorical, had forced him to confront who he was, what he was capable of, and what truly mattered. In the end, it wasn't the money or the opportunities that Brad had offered. It wasn't the promise of a bigger life or a better life. It was the life he had already built. His role as a father became everything. Oscar found solace in his children. He became more present than he'd ever been, his heart now fully focused on them, on making sure they were safe and loved, even as their parents no longer shared the same roof. Melanie, on the other hand, felt the weight of her choices in a quieter, more insidious way. Every day was a struggle to reconcile who she had been with who she had become. The apartment she had moved into was small but functional, a far cry from the house they had shared, and every time she crossed the threshold, a wave of loneliness would wash over her. When she was with the kids, it was better. The warmth of their laughter, their uncomplicated love, gave her small moments of peace. But every time she dropped them off at Oscar's, every time she saw the steadiness in his eyes, she was reminded of the distance between them, of what she had taken from him, from them. And in those moments, guilt would tighten around her chest, making it hard to breathe. They spoke occasionally about the kids, about logistics, about mundane things. It was civil, but there was an unspoken wall between them, a quiet understanding that whatever they had once shared was irrevocably lost. It wasn't anger anymore. It was just distance. "How are they doing?" Melanie asked, her voice soft, unsure. Oscar met her gaze, his expression neutral. "They're good," he said, his voice steady but distant. Melanie nodded slowly, her throat tightening. I know you are. You're doing everything you can for them." Oscar shifted slightly, his eyes lingering on her. Then, in a quiet voice, he added, "We both are." He didn't say more. For a moment, Melanie wanted to reach out, to grab him by the shoulders and say something, to beg him to remember the good times, the times when they were a team, when they were happy. But she didn't. Instead, she just nodded again, her eyes lingering on him before she turned and walked away. It wasn't the resolution she had hoped for. It wasn't the reunion, the healing, or even the forgiveness that she'd imagined would come. Just a quiet acceptance of what they had lost, realizing that the life they had shared was gone, and there was nothing left to do but live in the aftermath. That night, Melanie sat alone in her apartment. She glanced at the framed family photos on the mantel, the ones of Oscar and the kids, the ones of all of them together. She thought of the plans they had made, the vacations, the house, the future. She thought of how different it all looked now. Melanie finally understood something. She could never go back to what they had been, no matter how hard she tried. All that was left now were the scars, and the faint hope, somewhere deep inside, that time might heal them.